All right guys, welcome back. So today we're starting a video series that's all about scouting. And on this video, we're going to talk about kind of a high-level overview of who we are, how we learned how to do all this scouting, and then the items that we're looking for when we're scouting a property.
Yeah, and we're going to be using Onyx to really do that high overview of the properties that we're looking at, and then we're going to take you along with us when we actually get onto the new property to see if we can confirm some of the things that we found.
Yeah, so background on us is Billy and I hunt well over 200 days a year here in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And over the last 10, 12 years, we've really gotten good at scouting these micro properties and figuring out where deer are using certain areas, what kind of topography or features deer are attracted to. And then what we figured out is that when we're hunting other bigger properties, that all of those rules still apply. And ultimately what we're going to get into is that deer are deer no matter where they are, whether it be here in the suburbs or on a new piece of property that we just got in Ohio. What this video is going to feature is our new property in Ohio. We have never been there before. We will take you guys there with us during this video. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about kind of a high-level overview of scouting. Then we're going to take you guys with us while we e-scout this property. We're going to drop pins together. We're going to look at where we want to hunt, and then we're all going to go together for the first time to this property, and we're going to scout it. We're going to show you exactly, hopefully confirm the spots that we found online, and then show you how we're going to prep that spot and then how we're going to plan to come back and hunt there. So we think it should be pretty informative. I think one thing that's really important to remember though is that there's no like golden rule to, you know, if this then that kind of scenario. All these properties are different. The deer are different to some capacity as far as where they're using areas to bed or travel or whatever. And so what we're gonna do is try to give you a quick kind of download of all the stuff that we've learned in the past, and hopefully you can use those as tools in your toolbox to put them to use on your property or in your hunting scenario.
Yeah, we're going to show you exactly what translates from something like a suburban property that we're really used to over to these other larger properties, because deer are deer. You can pattern them anywhere, but like you said, each property is different, but the one common theme is that there are deer. Whitetail deer is a whitetail deer, and they're going to act in a certain way no matter where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's pretty cool that, you know, with the amount of hunting that we get to do and the fact that we get to do it year round, you know, we've been able to learn 200 plus days a year for the last 12, 15 years, 20 years, you know, a lot of stuff. We've gotten lifetimes worth of seasons worth of knowledge in there. And now we're able to kind of put the puzzle pieces together faster and be successful quickly. And we learned that on some more rural properties, and we think it's pretty cool. So let's get into it. All right, so for this scenario, what we're gonna do is we're gonna pretend like we just got permission on a property that we've never seen before. And we're gonna walk you through kind of the checklist that we go down when we're looking at a property.
Yeah, so Taylor, what's the first thing, as soon as you get a property, you haven't been there yet, you pull up Onyx, what's the very first thing that you look at?
The first thing I'm looking at is the property boundaries and also kind of the makeup of that property. So how big is it? Where are the borders to it? What's the access going to be like? Kind of just getting my bearings for the property, and not only what the property consists of inside those boundaries, but what's around it.
So, for example, if there are ag fields around it, or if there's a horse farm next to it, where maybe potentially on that horse farm, you know, there's maybe not as much hunting.
Yep.
You know, cattle farms. Or
is our hunt club next door? You know, what's going on not only on that property, but also outside of those boundaries. And also I'm thinking through kind of where are my access points to this property? How can I get on it? How could other people get on it? How are the deer gonna move through? Just kind of like, what's my playing field look like? And how can I start, mentally I'm thinking through, how can I position myself on that chessboard, if you will?
Sure, so it's that property boundaries, the access points, seeing really, is it a feasible property to hunt? And then after that, then we start looking at some of those features, whether on the property, whether it's edge habitat, transitions, how much edge habitat is it? Is it just a big block of timber? Is it just all one big field? Which neither one of those really hit what we want. We're looking for, more edge, more topography and things like that.
Yeah, and that's another point that I'm looking at is like, what's the overall topographical makeup of it? Does it have 1,000 feet of elevation fall between it? Does it have 2 feet of elevation fall? Kind of, where does that go? So those are the general things I'm looking for. Another thing I'm looking at is, what are the features of that property? Is there a giant barn in the middle? Is there a silo? Is there a giant pond in the middle? Just what are the overall features?
So why would you look at, like, let's say it's a barn or an ag building, why would that be a consideration for you in the middle of your hunting property?
The whole thing I'm thinking of is, what is the access like on this property for myself, but also for others? What kind of human traffic is on this
like
property?
The landowner, a farmer, are they going to be accessing these buildings and things while we're trying to hunt 15 yards away from them?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look at accessing a property, you have to put all these factors into the mix, and you want to know exactly. I can access the property from the north side, but if the predominant wind is coming from the north, that's probably a bad access point because it's just going to blow your scent right down into the deer. So access, I think, is really critical.
Yeah, the access to the property is really crucial because it dictates how and when you can hunt the property, and also when you can have pressure, like your boots on the ground there. Access is key. It also helps maybe the property next door gets a ton of access and a ton of pressure. That could help you. So it's really important to think about the access of not just inside the confines of your own property lines, but also on the outside of it to get that whole snapshot. Because remember, deer are not focused on the property boundaries like we are. They don't care. So overall, the access to the property is key. It depends on, we're thinking about where can we park? Where are we able to walk through here? Are there trails? Do we have to like break bush to just walk through the entire, just overall thinking about how we can get from point A to point B and how those deer are affected by it. So Billy, directly correlating with that access is pressure, right? And not only how are we putting pressure on it, but how are others putting pressure on it? So what are you looking at in regards to pressure?
So there are different types of pressure. There's obviously hunting pressure, from your neighbors and maybe someone else who has access to the property who can hunt. But there's also pressures from maybe there's dogs that run through a certain area that people let them off the leash, or the farmer or the landowner uses a certain section of the property, and that maybe will push deer. Maybe there's a horse farm on one side like we talked about before. So you have to find those pressure points because they can actually create funnels for you, which when you push pressure into a property, those deer are going to skirt it. So you know where that zone is. A lot of times that 75 to 150 yards away from that pressure that I like to really at least start.
Yeah, and granted, like this is what we're looking at from a high level view, kind of e-scouting, but we're still looking for, is there an ag field? If there's an ag field, that means there's a farmer. How often is that farmer there? Does he pee in the perfect inside cut every morning? Or kind of, we're gonna make a point to go in and check those areas out. Same with, is there like a clear cut on the property that makes it look like it's owned by a timber company? So therefore, when does next time they're cutting? Are they coming through checking the property? You're just trying to make mental notes of all these things so you can understand them, because the last thing you want to be doing is driving, in our case, to Ohio, which is a 6-hour drive from where we're located, and November 6th in the morning.
And the whole place is clear cut.
Yeah, the timber companies come through 2 days before, right? I mean, that would be a gigantic waste of time. So the key is to just make sure that you are thinking about all these items and trying to understand, what could potentially cause that to be there, or who else is using the property, and not only around you, not only on your specific property, but also all around you. So
Absolutely.
the last thing that we're going to look for once we've gone through our checklist is the topography. And we're not looking at specific items, just moreover, what's the topo that's there, combined with what's timber, what's ag, or what's timber, what's not timber, and what is in those blank areas.
Yeah, and you can see sometimes, like with that topo, I mean, if something's glaringly obvious, like, wow, there's a huge creek bottom that goes through here. This is a really steep bluff right here, or this is a major saddle. I mean, those are going to be obvious pieces that we're going to put together before we actually start really delving into the topography of it.
Yeah, but what we're looking at generally is, what's the topo like? Is it, 300 feet of elevation change? Is there 3 feet of elevation change? And then where are certain areas that we want to focus on? And this is one of the features that I really like to have in the hybrid map mode, because I like to look at a combination of the topography, but also
the satellite view.
Yes, I'm looking for habitat edge, change in like really thick, maybe like a cedar thicket or a pine thicket with hardwoods, and like that big dark green line, up against regular woods or any items like that. So I'm generally taking a note of just overall topography, and then kind of looking for those glaring features that you talk about.
There's glaring transitions between all of those features, whether topography, vegetation, whatever it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's actually dive into our specific property. Let's show you what we're looking for on this parcel, and then let's drop some pins and show you where we're going to look once we drive up to our property and check it out.
Yeah.
So let's grab the computer and dive into it.
Yeah, let's check it out.
All right, so now we're going to dive into what exactly we're looking for on our property. So we got our property pulled up here. This is our spot in Ohio. Please don't come hunt here.
Please no.
It's going to be kind of easy to find this spot, so don't hunt it. So the first thing we're looking for, again, are the property boundaries. So I've outlined these property boundaries here with the property line, and obviously this is what we got. But one thing that's important to note is what's around our property here. All right, so up here to the north, there's clearly a farm here. This has, it's a pond. We got cattle in there.
If you look at all those little circles, that's where they drop hay bales. Go over to the right, you can actually literally see cattle in the
pond.
In the pond there.
Yeah.
So that's a field that's going to be used as a pasture land. So deer are probably not going to be crossing through that, but probably on the edge of it.
Right. So we know that to the north we might have the deer are going to feel comfortable moving around. Obviously, there's a road here to our west and southwest. Looking on our specific property, you can tell right away that there's old growth and new growth here. So we're looking at the difference between where it's been cut. So we want to find out what the timber schedule is, what the cut schedule is, when the foresters might be on the property, make sure they don't screw us up. We're also looking at our access. Now, granted, we have a road that runs through a corner of our property, which makes it slightly easier to access, but that means other people might be coming through there too. We want to be careful of that. And really, our access are those two spots. We have the road here in the top, northwest corner, and then right on the southwestern corner, kind of south of the center of our property, we have our only access point. So that kind of limits us based on our ability to actually drive into this property. So we want to make sure that when we're diving in, that we have good trails set up to where we can get in and out quietly. And it's important to think through not only your access to the spot, but also leaving it, because it does no good for you to go through and just show off.
You sneak in, the deer don't see you in the morning, and then you leave for the afternoon, and you're blowing
everything out. So the other thing to look at here is there's clearly a creek bed through here. The water doesn't show, but I can tell right away that there's water here based on the topography and also the vegetation that's growing out of it.
And look at the finger that comes out in between the old growth and the new growth. That finger, the reason it's still there is because they couldn't harvest those trees.
Yeah, it's too wet.
It's too wet. They're in a creek bottom.
Right. Now, that's great for us though, because we know that the deer, if they are using this area, we want to check that finger, because the odds are the deer will be staying to
more
that
edge habitat.
Exactly.
I really like that spot right there, because you have that new growth, you have the finger to the east, to the west, you've got that topography right there between those two high humps. That's a perfect little saddle there. And there's a trail that goes right through from one of the access points. So that could potentially be an access point to a nice.
Yeah, it looks like there's a nice, overgrown logging road there, and that should be, pretty good access. So overall, from a high level overview standpoint, this looks really good. The one thing that concerns me is just to our southeast, there are food plots on our neighbor's property. So they are clearly hunting there. There's a good amount of hunting pressure, and odds are if we can maintain a low impact hunting, a lot of those deer can come over to our side, but we also want to make sure that our property boundary is well marked so that the hunters don't accidentally cross the boundary into our chunk of the woods.
Exactly, and you know, just to the north of that private lease, there is a state game land.
So the first thing that we're looking for are beds, and what I like to do is I like to work in a clockwise motion around the property just because I don't want to overlook a spot. It's not unusual for me to get a little overexcited and just start kind of getting sporadic, and next thing you know, I've missed some spots. So I'll just pick a corner, you know, it's kind of arbitrary, and I'm gonna start looking for bedding only. So what I'm looking for are areas that are in the top third of a property.
Top third elevation wise.
Correct, so a third of the way down from the top on the leeward side of a hill. And a lot of the times what I really like is something with a long bench or a topographical ridge that has a point with a steep drop off on the leeward side of that hill. The deer like to be on points. A good example of a point would be this right here. So something in this area right there, a deer is going to bed here a lot of the time because what they're able to do is if you have a south wind, you can go there, a north wind, you go there. The deer can keep this area and be bedding all the way around here. They can also bed up here. So like this area and specifically is going to be a great area. So sorry to cut you off, but so what we're going to do is we would save that there in a heartbeat. I'm also going to save a spot here that we're going to walk through. And what I do is I like to leave them as just a generic X, but you can figure out however you want to mark a property, whatever system you're using, make sure you just keep it the same. So here's another spot in this little bowl and on this side that I like a lot. So I think we would kind of come through here. And then what I'm basically going to do is just work along this ridge line, just dropping pins in spots that I want to check. And even though it's also important to do your homework and kind of look up what the predominant wind in these areas are when you're going to be hunting it. It doesn't do any good to go in the summertime and scout and think you're going to have like a southeastern wind or southwestern wind.
When in November you have a northeast wind, yeah.
And so an app that I really like to use is Wind Finder or windmap.com. There are a lot of these apps that have these. So now here, that point to me is pretty good for a south wind and also right here. And so what we're doing is we're going to drop all these spots on areas that look like they have good potential bedding, and then we're going to go in and walk them, and we're going to look for the obvious sign, because once you find those bedding areas, you then can find pinch points or topographical features just outside of them that will really enhance your probability of catching that deer on their feet during daylight hours.
Yeah, and the next thing, when you want to relate those bedding areas then to where the deer are going to be feeding at specific times of the year. And then you can really narrow down which pinch points are going to be the best at certain times of the year. And then also, between two bedding areas, are there nice topographical features that would bring a buck between two bedding areas that would really pinch those deer down?
Yep. So now that we've gone through, we've highlighted a good number of where we think these bedding areas would be. The next thing that I'm looking for are just general pinch points, and those are going to be saddles, they're going to be draws, benches, areas that the deer are going to funnel to in order to walk through, because deer like me, they're lazy, right? And they don't want to get killed, which I don't want to do either. So what they're going to do is they're going to find the easiest, safest way from point A to point B. And point B is going to be a destination spot or a spot that they want to get to.
Could be their bedding, could be their water, could be food.
Water, food, whatever. And so what we're then going to do is go through and look here. So again, I'm going to start on a clockwise motion. And so this area right here, this is a classic saddle, okay? That looks great. I love that it's coming from an area that's off property, but this spot to me is a textbook crow's foot. The deer are going to congregate here. There's a lot of scent pooling in that area. That's a great spot that's going to draw deer, and they're going to come over into our spot through this saddle. That to me is a hot spot. I want to check that out.
So Taylor, that's one of the easiest ways for them to get from that western property over onto our property, because if you look at the topographical lines, that gut that goes up right towards that saddle, it shows that on either side, to the north and to the south of that mark, are higher points. So they're going to want to go through that lower spot between those two high points because it's easier to walk.
Correct. That line that we just drew there, that's how every deer that's coming from everything on the western side of it are going to come through here. They might go through that saddle to the north, but that's off our property, so we're not going to check that.
And it's a much steeper edge right on the eastern side. If you go directly to the east, there's another major saddle right here, between two other high points.
And so that's where we just drew that line there. It's important to remember here also that all the deer that are coming from our property generally, like that connect this line over to the eastern spot, they're all going to come through that saddle in order to get over to this little crow's foot, which is a nice attraction for deer. So I really like where this second line is. I'm going to delete that line out of there just because it's
obvious.
Yes. But what we are going to do is we're going to drop a pin there now, because I want to go check that out. I want to find a way to access that point, and I want to find some ambush spots in there when we get in there. I think that's a great spot. The other thing I really like about that saddle is just to the south of it, there's another great saddle. And so between those two saddles and the fact that there's what appears to be an old logging road running up it, that's a great spot. Maybe Billy and I can walk in together
and both hunt a saddle.
Exactly. And now we've maximized our coverage of an area, because if there's a good deer, it's coming through one of those, and we've minimized our impact on the property by us both going into the same spot. We're kind of walking up the same trail. So to me, I love that setup. That's a great spot for a hunt. Electronically, it looks like it at least, so hopefully it looks as good as it does in person as it does on the map. Once we've started dropping these pins and we're looking at where are the beds, where are the saddles, you can kind of draw lines from bedding through the saddles. And once we get boots on the ground and we find mass trees or areas that the deer are eating, and also doe bedding, now we can really connect the dots of where the deer are, what they're using, and how can we, again, maximize our opportunity to hunt it. I'm not going to go hunt over one buck bed. I'm going to go hunt closest to those beds where I think the deer has to walk through, and I'm going to take into account, again, the morning or evening thermals, what the wind direction is, and kind of really put all those pieces of the puzzle together to maximize my chance of seeing a deer and getting a shot.
Exactly. So, there are times where we will target a specific deer, but then in a situation like this where we're brand new to the property, we want to maximize every single feature on that property and to our advantage. We want to give ourselves the advantage over the deer.
Absolutely. And it's important to note, though, that we're doing it with the minimum amount of risk involved. So we're being as aggressive as we can be without completely just going balls to the wall crazy and blowing all the deer out, right? So it's a tactical advantage to try and keep the wind just in our favor. The wind is so much in the deer's favor that they feel comfortable walking there, but it's just enough in our favor that we're not blowing everything out. And we're going to blow out some spots. Your wind has to go somewhere.
Yes.
But what we're trying to do is maximize our opportunity to harvest, but minimize our opportunity to get busted. And where those kind of two circles overlap is where the success is, in my opinion.
And one of the spots that you talked about are those bedding areas that have steep drop-offs. It's not very typical that a deer is going to walk straight up a steep drop-off. They're going to try to use that topography and use the path of least resistance as opposed to straight up a steep hill. So you want that wind to blow off that steep hill a lot of times, and you're hunting out in front of you.
Absolutely. Well, it's also important to think about which way the wind's coming, but also where the thermals are rising, because what that does is it creates a scent cone. The deer love to walk in that scent cone. You can normally always find a deer trail a third of the way down from the top elevation-wise on the leeward side of a ridge or anything, so that the deer can walk in there and smell what's above them and below them and know that they're feeling comfortable and safe walking there. It's also why they bed there.
And yeah, another reason for being on a leeward side is if you do get a cold wind in the fall or in the winter, they can tuck back behind it, still have that scent coming around them in eddies, but it's not blasting them right in the face and freezing them.
Yep, absolutely. So now that we've gone through, we've dropped some pins, we've identified the saddles, the ridges, we got some good bedding areas in here. I think it's time to hop in the truck and drive on up to Ohio and get some boots on the ground and figure out, you know, how accurate we were in dropping these pins.
I'll pay for tolls, you pay for gas.
Looks like we're taking the Jersey Turnpike.
Prius?
Yeah.